Hello and welcome. We're going to head right upstairs to the Greensboro Residency for Original Works Flex Space right here in the Greensboro Cultural Arts Center to meet Cassandra, who is going to teach us a little bit about weaving with the Community Weaving Project. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet Cassandra and find out what she's working on.
Can you just kind of talk me through what you're doing right now?
Sure, yeah. So I'm building a quilt, and for a quilt you have to have 3 layers. You've got the quilt top, you've got the batting, which is the fluffy stuff that makes it warm, and you've got the backing. So right now I'm still working on the quilt top. I put all the pieces together, and now I need for the overall dimensions to be slightly wider so that it will fit on a bed. And I'm adding a 2-inch strip around the whole quilt top so that I can make the overall dimensions a little bit wider, but it also serves as a nice visual border so that you've got something to kind of frame the pattern out on the edges. So I'm also picking up my scissors, and if I see any little threads that need trimming to make things look nice and neat, now is a great opportunity to do that. And I'm using the iron to flatten out my seams so that they're all in the same direction, and this makes it so that it's not really bulky and messy in the back. I use a lot of scrap fabric, so you'll notice that there's a lot of different patterns here, and that's just how I like it. I don't like when things are too matchy, but I try to find fabrics that are going to go together, but that weren't necessarily meant to go together.
You mean as far as like material type, or?
Well, the material type for all of these is the same. All of it's the same weight of fabric, quilting cotton. If it's going to be something that needs to be laundered, it's a good idea to use the same type of fabric. But in my art quilts, I'll use all different types of materials as long as the colors go together. But because this is a functional quilt, I want to use all quilting cotton fabric, and then I picked which colors I wanted to go together so that it would look good.
Now, how do you get your material?
This is all scrap fabric that is left over from the ends of bolts of fabric. So remnants that I got from a local fabric retailer that I have a relationship with. So the alternative is that all this fabric would have been thrown in the trash.
Sort of recycling everything.
Absolutely. That's like the #1 priority. Besides getting my creativity out and creating something beautiful, it is using materials that were otherwise destined for the landfill. And that's something I did in my previous line of work too, which was an art supply store in town called Shelf Life Art and Supply Company. And at Shelf Life I sold new and used art materials, arts and crafts materials. And people could bring in pre-owned art supplies, and then I would resell them to make sure that they got a new home and didn't go to waste. So I do that in my own personal art practice too. So right now I'm just going around the whole perimeter of the quilt. And I think I'm almost at the end. And we can lay it out and see the whole thing.
How long have you been working on this?
I made the quilt squares earlier this summer, and then I've been in the residency for a week now, and the first thing I did was attach all the squares together, and that took about 3 days. And then putting this border on has just taken a couple hours, but putting the squares together themselves, it took a lot of hours. I try not to count that kind of thing. All right, would you like to see it all laid out?
Sure. Size and scale of this whole thing, did you have to like cut these individually and lay them all out, or?
So I looked up online what the dimensions of a queen bed are, and then you have to account for bringing the quilt over the edge of the mattress a little bit. So I want this to be about 100 square inches. Each of the blocks that I made is 8 square inches. However, when you sew them together, you're losing that little bit of fabric on every edge. That's called the seam allowance. So,
Right, because it's got to overlap a little bit in order to be something.
exactly. So it shrinks up, and that's why I had to add this edging to it to account for the shrinkage. I'm going to remeasure it and see if I don't need to add a little bit more, another layer around the edge. And then I'll be ready to put the layers together. And because this is so large, I will not be able to quilt it, which means quilting is the action of putting all the layers together. I will not be able to quilt it using my sewing machine. I'm going to have to quilt it by hand.
Wow.
Yes. There are special machines that do it, that can handle this much fabric, but I do not have one of them. So it becomes very meditative, and I'll plop myself in front of a good Netflix series or listen to an audiobook while I do that.
What do you listen to usually, or what do you watch usually?
Right now I am listening to some language learning programs on audiobook. I'm trying to strengthen my Italian language speaking because that's what my heritage is. So I'm trying to just take this opportunity to work on my Italian, but I will also listen to podcasts and watch Netflix and whatever I can get into my ears. I'll listen to music too, just so that my brain has something extra to do while I'm doing something super repetitive that doesn't require a whole lot of thinking. This is my community weaving project. It's something that I started in 2012 and 2013. I brought it to different vending markets in Greensboro, like the Tate Street Festival, City Market, and other festivals, because I wanted a way to have an interaction with people that encouraged creativity but also did not have a monetary exchange. One of the things that frustrated me about vending was that because people expected a monetary exchange, sometimes they would make this kind of U shape around the vending tents because they didn't want to feel pressured to buy something. When what's really there is an opportunity to connect with people. So this was an invitation to connect. And I've brought this project back for my residency because I think that, with everything we've been through in the last year and a half, it's really meaningful for me. It's something that I'm craving, wanting to reconnect with people again. So I'm glad that the Greensboro Culture Center is requiring masks, and I'm vaccinated, of course, and so I'm feeling a lot safer about the idea of working on a project together. And I'm also going to be introducing a virtual way to participate because I know there are so many people who would love to come in person and can't for COVID reasons, but also just for distance reasons. It's a way to connect with people outside of Greensboro too, by introducing something virtual. And I think that's one of the great things that's come out of our quarantine time is this ability to kind of think in using our technology to broaden our community. So on Saturday and Sunday of last week, it was during the folk festival, I had people come in and contribute to the weaving. I have a bunch of fabric scraps. These are also fabric scraps that come from the local fabric vendor in town, and these would have been thrown away, but they are the perfect little scraps to weave into this loom. And tilt it up a little bit. So what happens when we stand around the loom together? We can probably fit 4 people around the loom, and we keep our hands busy by weaving the fabric over and under these tight threads, which are called the warp threads. And as we keep our hands busy, that allows us to have a conversation more freely. And it allows people to meet each other and talk to each other who maybe wouldn't have approached each other in real life outside of this. So not only does it foster creating a community in person, it also creates a conversation between the people who are contributing, people who left the room 2 hours ago, left their mark here, and now you can come in and respond to it. You can, change it, you can move it around, you can add something next to it that's gonna make it pop. And so this becomes a visual representation of what happens when we get people in a room together to talk to each other.
That looks very interesting. Some of them are these braided?
That's a braid, yeah, I did that braid, but then somebody else saw that and liked it, and so they made one too. And I love how they put it in kind of this circular shape, so that's going to change the way that other pieces can be woven in.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
You can weave all the way across, or you can choose to just weave in little sections like this, and that kind of creates these cool windows. This one is a twist that was just twisted around one of the warp threads. So there's no wrong or right way. It's all about being creative. How many different ways can you use the materials? How many different color juxtapositions can you create that are going to be really visually interesting? It's a good way to just try something out and explore and play. And I think the result is always beautiful.
yeah. Because you have different people with different ideas and everything.
Yes, and the results are unexpected, and I think that's something that we can be really drawn to, is trying to make sense of something that is not in order. It's interesting to look at. So my job from this point will be to figure out a solution for all of these tails that are left over. I will be weaving these in to fill in some of these empty spaces, but otherwise this is pretty much done with the weaving part. Then I'm going to take a window, an old vintage window that again would have been thrown away, and I made this wooden loom to the size of that window already, and then I'm going to attach the window to the front, and it serves as kind of a shadow box. And I can show you some examples of finished ones that I've done in the past. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, maybe I'll show you the other window and I'll tell you what I've been thinking about.
And are you going to do these little looming projects like kind of on a regular basis? Is there
Yes.
like where people can find you, a time, a date?
Yes. I'm gonna have to make another loom. I might have to make several over the course of my residency, which I totally welcome, and I might even get to play with making some bigger ones if we're gonna have this much participation. It was always kind of a question of how many people would turn up, so I'm so pleased, happy to have the opportunity to make another one. I'm going to have regular studio hours, open studio hours on Wednesdays from 6 to 7 p.m. So if you're heading over to Wine Wednesday at Cafe Europa, come on in, swing by, weave a little, and then go grab a glass of wine. I also am going to have open studio hours on Fridays from noon to 1. So if you've got a little lunch break, come on by. You don't need to spend the whole hour weaving with me. Just come in for a little bit and come see what I'm doing. And the great thing about being in here over the course of 6 weeks is that if you come in early on and then visit again toward the end, you'll get to see what kind of progress I've made and how many things have changed during that period of time. So I'm really looking forward to that. So this is a community weaving project that I completed in 2013, and as you can see, it's got the same elements as the new piece. It's got the loom back here that was strung with warp threads and then woven with scrap fabrics, and then I use a old window frame and attach it. I've used brass mending plates to attach it because I had them on hand and because I like the way it looks. So this serves as kind of a shadow box, something to finish it off, make it look finished. And another thing that I've been thinking about is with my past versions of the community weaving project, you can choose which way you want to face the window, whether you're looking into the window or out of the window. My old ones, you can see this latch on the inside of the window here. That means we're looking into the window. But for the ones that I'm going to do for the residency, I am going to flip the window around on those so that we are going to be looking at the inside of the window, looking out. And I think that's important for this moment because of the past year and a half. Because we've been staying indoors, we're looking out of our windows. However, I want to make the statement that we can still create community even when we're looking out of the window. So I think that it'll be important for me to flip the window for these more recent pieces.
Very symbolic.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to, when you're an artist, you've got to create layers and layers and layers of meaning. And, I think that there's going to be people who come and see what I've done, and they will create their own meaning, and they will create their own interpretation to it too. And that's always something that not only can you not control, but is also part of the process, very much part of the process. After it leaves my brain and comes into the world, and even especially with this project, is made by different people's hands. You know, I don't get to control the narrative, but I do get to make intentional choices about what I want it to be.
Now this one's a little bit more tightened up than the other one.
Yes.
Did you have to make that work? How did you go about that?
Yes, so before this one was finished, it looked a lot like the one that we just saw, and I did come in and kind of finish off the edges, take care of any loose pieces of fabric hanging out. So that's one thing that I will do at the very end when I think it's complete, is just tidy it up and make sure it looks finished and neat. The next time I get out the saw to make another community weaving loom, I'm also going to be chopping down this little wooden frame to the size of this wall quilt that I've made, so that I can stretch the fabric around the wooden frame, kind of like a canvas. This is a piece that I made earlier this year, and you can see it uses a really similar technique as the large scale quilt that I'm working right now, but that I use a lot of different types of fabrics. This is more of just a straight up art piece, so it's not functional, so I can use lots of different fabrics, and all of these are recycled fabrics and hand embroidered. So this is going to be stretched over a wooden frame, kind of like a canvas, to finish it off.
How about, I know you said you don't really think about the hours, but how long did it take you to put this together?
Oh, I really don't know. And I actually made different parts of it at different times.
I got you.
So the black area down here is made out of 2 pairs of old black denim jeans.
Mm-hmm.
And so I cut these little triangles and sewed those together in this pattern. And that sat on my wall for a couple months until I created this and realized, oh, they would look really great together. So sometimes I just make different components and hang them up so I can see them, and then it will occur to me to play with them and see if I can make them work together. That's a big part of how I work. So not everything's always made all at one time. I let things simmer and see how they speak to me over time, see how they change.
And then you had these little ink blots. That's what I see. I don't know. To each his own. And they seem like you put a lot of work into that.
Yes, I hand stitched all of these. I consider them kind of like flowers, but I mean they're very ink blotty. So
Sorry, I was gonna go with I was thinking originally like hippie flowers.
well, yeah.
Where my head went, and then I went to think, I don't know.
I think it's, it's all of the above, right? Like I said, everybody's got their own interpretation, and that's all valid. So, but this is just a shape that I like to draw. It's a fun exercise to try to draw these. So my sketchbooks are filled with this shape, and I wanted to bring it out into fabric, and it's black velvet. So it's got a really nice texture to it. And I hand stitched them onto here using what's called a blanket stitch. And I have a quilt that my great-grandmother made for me when I was little. And it has all these little kittens embroidered and appliqued onto it. So that's what, when you take a piece of fabric in a shape and you stitch it onto the surface of something, that's called applique. And so she appliqued all these kittens, and she used a blanket stitch, and she used variegated embroidery floss, so it changed colors as it went around. So I chose those techniques in direct reference to this quilt that I grew up with in my house. So I'm infusing a personal piece of my story into the art that I'm making. Not everybody's going to necessarily know that or see that when they look at it, but I know that when I'm making it.
And tell me about your grandma, because you obviously have a close personal connection with this.
So I do come from a long line of people who worked with fabric. My paternal great-grandmother made quilts, she made clothing, she could make anything, and her house was decorated with all types of things that she made out of fabric. Then my maternal grandmother also sewed, and she made me and my cousins clothing when we were growing up. And when my mom was in high school, my grandmother owned a fabric store, and my mom worked at the fabric store. And so my mom grew up sewing, and it's something that I've just always had in my life. It connects me to my family, my heritage, and it makes me feel connected not only to my family, but I know this is a common thread. Forgive the pun. I know this is something that a lot of people have in common with a lot of women in their families doing handiwork in the home. So being able to take this into the world of art and not necessity is something, when I'm working with my hands, I feel connected to all of those women who came before me and all of the countless hours that they put into creating things with love for their family members. I feel like I'm imbuing the same sort of thing into the artwork that I'm making.
Tell me about the importance of being in this space and the opportunity that it provides to artists.
So I think I'm the 5th person in this space. It's a really new program, and I think it is something that is so needed in our community. I have spent the past 8 years of my life really invested in Greensboro's art community through my store. So I've spent a lot of time talking to other artists and paying attention to the opportunities available to artists in Greensboro. And we've never had an opportunity like this before. So it's a great big giant space. I know I don't have a space as large as this in my house. I think that's probably true for a lot of people. So just having access to a large empty space to make your artwork is huge. And this space isn't limited to visual artists either. So I know some of the people who have been in here have been filmmakers and dancers, performing artists. So you can be physical in this space too and expand. And there's something about being able to just have access to that brings out a whole another layer of possibilities that you wouldn't necessarily have if you're just working in a cramped little studio like I do and like so many people I know.